The Last Dance. Part 1. The Uninvited. Rain drummed against the limousine roof in a steady rhythm, matching the pounding in my temples. The driver, a kid who looked like he should still be in college, kept glancing nervously at me through the rearview mirror. "Big day, huh, sir?" I didn't answer. My fingers traced the embossed lettering on the wedding invitation that had arrived 3 weeks late, after the RSVP deadline, after the seating arrangements were finalized. After Mark had already been assigned to walk her down the aisle. "Mr. and Mrs. Andrew Caldwell request the pleasure of your company." No mention of me as father of the bride. Just another name on the guest list. The limo rolled to a stop outside St. Michael's Cathedral, where 20 years ago I'd held a squirming 5-year-old Emma during her first communion. Where I'd sat through every Christmas Eve Mass despite my lapsed faith. Where Sarah and I had renewed our vows on our 10th anniversary. Now the stone steps were covered in a plush red carpet, flanked by lilies so white they looked artificial. "Should I wait, sir?" The driver held the door as thunder rumbled in the distance. I handed him $200 bills. "If I'm not back in an hour, you might want to call the police." His chuckle died when he saw my face. The scent of gardenias hit me like a physical blow when I entered the narthex. Pachelbel's canon swelled from the string quartet, the same piece Emma had practiced relentlessly before her 6th grade recital, back when I was still Daddy instead of David. Then I saw her. My little girl. A stranger in a couture wedding gown that probably cost more than my first car, her arm linked with Mark's as if he hadn't disappeared for 3 years after the divorce. As if he'd earned the right to stand where I should have been. Sarah spotted me first. My ex-wife's champagne flute slipped from her fingers, shattering on the marble floor. The quartet faltered for half a beat. A dozen heads turned. I saw her lips form the words, "You weren't invited." The whispers started immediately. "Isn't that?" I heard they weren't. After everything with it. I took my seat in the last pew, directly behind Andrew's frat brother and a bridesmaid who smelled like cheap peach schnapps. The program in my hands listed: processional, bride escorted by Mark Henderson. Father-daughter dance, Mark Henderson. Wedding toast, Mark Henderson. My name appeared exactly nowhere. The ceremony passed in a haze of Latin verses and exchanged rings. When the priest pronounced them man and wife, Andrew dipped Emma into a kiss so deep it would have embarrassed me if I still cared. Then it happened. As they turned to face the crowd, Emma's eyes, those same hazel eyes that used to light up when I came home from work, locked onto mine. For one heartbeat, too, she stared at me like I was a ghost crashing her perfect day. I raised my program in a mock toast. Her face crumpled for just an instant before the bridal smile snapped back into place. And in that moment I knew with absolute certainty she hadn't sent that belated invitation. Sarah had. Which meant my little girl hadn't wanted me here at all. Part 2. The toast that wasn't. The reception hall smelled of seared filet mignon and gardenias, an expensive fragrance meant to mask cheaper truths. Crystal chandeliers dripped light onto linen-covered tables where guests sipped champagne and avoided looking at me. I made my way to the open bar, my dress shoes sticking slightly to the freshly polished floor. "Bourbon." "Neat." The bartender, a hipster with a waxed mustache, poured 3 fingers of something amber. "You're the dad, right?" I knocked it back in one swallow. "Not tonight, I'm not." Across the room, Sarah was whispering furiously to Emma near the head table. My daughter's face had gone the color of her ivory dress. Mark held court nearby, laughing too loudly at something Andrew's best man had said, his tan looking spray-on under the lights. The DJ's voice boomed through the speakers. "Now, the father of the bride will say a few words." Mark stumbled to the microphone, already slurring slightly. "When Emma was born." I stopped listening. He wasn't there when she took her first steps. I was, crouched on our living room carpet, arms outstretched as she wobbled toward me. He didn't stay up all night when she had pneumonia at 8. I did, reading Charlotte's Web aloud while her fever burned. He never helped her with algebra, never taught her to drive, never sat through 3-hour dance recitals just to see her 30-second solo. But here he was, spinning lies to a room full of people who should have known better. And that's when I knew my little girl was special! Mark finished with a flourish, raising his glass. The crowd applauded politely. My phone buzzed. Sarah outside. Now. I found her by the valet stand, her breath coming in short puffs in the chilly air. What the hell are you doing? She hissed, her manicured nails digging into my forearm. Enjoying the open bar. I shrugged. You should try it. Might unclench that jaw. You're ruining her wedding. I laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. Funny, I didn't realize I was that important. Sarah's face twisted. She's your daughter. Then why am I sitting at table 17 next to Andrew's second cousin's yoga instructor? She had no answer for that. Inside, the DJ announced the father-daughter dance. I watched from the shadows as Mark stepped on Emma's train twice during their awkward waltz. Her smile never slipped. She'd spent a lifetime perfecting that particular performance. When the song ended, Emma's eyes scanned the crowd. Searching. For me? I stepped into the light. For a heartbeat, we stared at each other across 20 years of bedtime stories and broken promises. Then Andrew swept her onto the floor for their first dance, and the moment shattered. My phone buzzed again. Unknown number, the terrace. Please. Emma stood alone by the stone railing, the city lights stretching beyond her like a promise she'd never keep. Up close, I could see the fine lines around her eyes that makeup couldn't hide. You came, she said softly. You invited me. She flinched. Mom sent those. Silence stretched between us, filled with all the things we'd never said. Dad, about Mark. Don't. I held up a hand. Just tell me one thing. When you pictured this day, was it always him? Tears welled in her eyes. It's complicated. It really isn't. I turned to leave. Wait. She grabbed my sleeve. Andrew's startup is, we need. Ah. There it was. I pried her fingers loose gently. Asked Mark? He's your real father, isn't he? The hurt in her eyes almost made me stay. Almost. Chapter 3: The Favor. The taxi ride home was a blur of neon lights and raindrops streaking across the windows. The driver, reeking of cheap cologne, attempted small talk, but I remained silent, rubbing at a champagne stain on my cuff. The doorman in our building, no, her building now, nodded as I stepped into the elevator. His eyes said everything. Another fight, Mr. Henderson? The apartment greeted me with darkness and the faint lavender air freshener Sarah always used after my cigars. A single light burned in the kitchen. She sat at the island wearing the silk robe I'd bought her last Christmas, her manicured fingers wrapped around a wine glass. Bank statements lay scattered across the marble counter. You're drunk, she observed without looking up. I removed my jacket, the stench of bourbon and bitterness clinging to me. Only way to survive these occasions. I'd recommend it. Sarah stood abruptly, her glass clinking against the counter. You humiliated her on the most important day of her life. Me? My fingers dug into the cold marble. Who begged me to pay for this circus a year ago? Who promised I'd have a front row seat? Who? She wanted you there. Sarah slammed her palm on the counter. Wine sloshed, staining the papers like blood. But you always put your pride above her happiness. Slowly, I pulled out my phone, opened the banking app, and slid it across to her. $48,000 this year alone, Sarah. Tuition. Her apartment rent. That goddamned honeymoon they're about to lose. My laugh cut through the tension. Wonder if Mark chipped in even $1? Her lips trembled. She's your daughter. No. I stepped closer, inhaling the familiar perfume that now smelled foreign. My daughter called me daddy. My daughter saved me a seat at school plays. My daughter. My voice broke. My daughter wouldn't auction my love for wire transfers. The silence between us grew thick and suffocating. A door slammed upstairs, neighbors tired of our drama. They need money, Sarah finally whispered. The resort is canceling their reservation. I laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. Let Mark pay. Or her genius husband. You know Andrew's having trouble with his job? Money? Responsibility? I began gathering documents from the drawer: passport, insurance papers, checkbook. Time for Emma to learn what it's like relying on her real father. Sarah suddenly grabbed my wrist. Her fingers felt like ice. If you walk out now. I froze, staring into her eyes, those beautiful, familiar eyes that now only held manipulation. What, Sarah? An ultimatum? Her lips quivered. I just want you to think about. I've thought. For 22 years. I pulled my arm free. Now it's your turn. As the door slammed behind me, I heard something shatter inside. Maybe the wine glass, maybe the last remnants of what we'd once called a family. Chapter 4: The Breaking Point. The motel's flickering neon sign cast ghostly blue light through the thin curtains. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the divorce papers delivered to my office that morning. Irreconcilable differences. Such clean words for such a messy destruction. A knock at the door. Not Sarah's sharp rap. Not the landlord's impatient pound. This was hesitant, 3 soft taps, then silence. I knew before opening it. Emma stood haloed by the parking lot lights, her designer coat dusted with rain. Behind her, a luxury SUV idled, Andrew white-knuckling the wheel. Can I come in? Her breath formed little clouds in the cold air. The room seemed to shrink when she entered. She perched on the edge of the chair, back rigid, eyes darting from the half-packed suitcase to the whiskey bottle on the nightstand. Mom says you're leaving? I folded the divorce papers slowly. She beat me to it. A moth battered itself against the lampshade between us. Emma's fingers worried at a loose thread on her coat sleeve, the same nervous habit she'd had since kindergarten. They canceled our honeymoon, she blurted. Andrew's investors pulled out last minute and you need money. The words tasted like gasoline. Her head snapped up. That's not. How much this time? The silence stretched thin. Somewhere down the hall, a television played infomercials. 30,000. Her whisper barely reached me. Just until Andrew's next funding round. I laughed then, a raw, ugly sound that made her flinch. Let me guess, Mark said no? Her face crumpled. He's going through a divorce too, and yet somehow, I'm still the one holding the checkbook. I stood abruptly, the chair screeching against the floor. Tell me, Emma, was there ever a time you loved me more than my credit limit? Her gasp was the only answer I needed. The knocker on the door swung again. Andrew, this time, his golf tin gone sallow under the fluorescent lights. We gotta go. His eyes darted to me. The meeting with the investors is in an hour. She rose slowly, smoothing non-existent wrinkles from her dress. For a heartbeat, we simply looked at each other, two strangers bound by blood and broken promises. Then she reached into her purse. The envelope was thick, creamy. Mr. David Henderson written in Sarah's looping script. She wanted me to give you this. Emma pressed it into my hands. Said you'd understand? I waited until their taillights disappeared before tearing it open. The first page, a real estate listing for our family home. Sold. The second, a screenshot of a bank transfer. $250,000 from our joint account to Emma's trust fund. Dated the day after the wedding. The third, a photo I hadn't seen in 20 years. Sarah, young and laughing, pressed against Mark on a beach somewhere. The timestamp, 3 months before Emma was born. The whiskey bottle shattered against the wall. Chapter 5: The Reckoning. The lab results arrived on a Tuesday morning. I sat in my car outside the medical center for 27 minutes before opening the envelope. The numbers didn't surprise me, 0% probability of paternity, yet seeing them in black and white made my hands shake anyway. Sarah's Lexus was in the driveway when I pulled up. She stood framed in the kitchen window, sipping coffee like this was just another morning. Like our entire marriage hadn't been built on a lie. The door was unlocked. "You're back," she said without turning around. The house smelled of lemon cleaner and the jasmine perfume she'd worn since college. I dropped the DNA test on the counter beside her. "Were you ever going to tell me?" Her coffee cup clattered against the marble. For a long moment she just stared at the paper, her breathing shallow. When she finally looked up, her eyes were dry. "What difference would it have made?" The casual cruelty of the question stole my breath. 23 years, Sarah. 23 years of birthdays and Christmases and what? She stepped closer, her perfume suddenly suffocating. "You would have left? Walked away from her?" The photo from the envelope lay between us, young Sarah and Mark, tangled together on some Caribbean beach. "You let me believe she was mine. She is yours." Sarah's fist slammed down on the counter. "You changed her diapers. You taught her to ride a bike. I paid for her life," I corrected coldly. While Mark got to be the fun weekend dad. The house was too quiet. No Emma practicing piano in the living room. No Sarah humming while she cooked. Just the ticking of the antique clock Mark had given us for our 10th anniversary, a joke I was only now understanding. "Where is she?" Sarah's smile was razor thin. "With her real father, of course. They're at the country club, celebrating Andrew's new investment." I nearly laughed. "Let me guess. Mark's money?" Her silence was confirmation enough. The country club was all polished wood and pretension. I spotted them immediately, Emma radiant in yellow sundress, Andrew's arms slung possessively around her waist, Mark holding court with a group of golf buddies. The perfect family portrait. Emma saw me first. Her smile died mid-laugh. "Dad." Mark turned, his tan face going pale beneath the bronze. "David." What a surprise. I didn't bother with greetings. Just tossed the DNA test onto the table between their mimosas. The silence spread like bloodstain. Andrew actually scooted back. Emma's hands trembled as she picked up the paper. "What is this?" "The truth," I said simply. Her eyes darted between me and Mark, the math clicking into place. "No. That's not. Ask your mother," I interrupted. "Though something tells me she's known all along." Mark recovered first, his politician's smile sliding back into place. "Now, David, let's not be hasty. I'm not here for explanations." I kept my eyes on Emma. "I came to say goodbye." Her breath hitched. "Dad, please." The word cracked something in me. That simple syllable I'd chased for 2 decades. "You have a father," I said quietly, nodding toward Mark. "And now you have his bank account too." The country club's manicured lawns blurred as I walked away. Emma called after me once, a broken "Daddy." That sounded more like the little girl I'd raised than the woman she'd become, but I didn't turn around. Some bridges aren't meant to be rebuilt. Epilogue 6 months later. The postcard arrived in March. A generic beach sunset, postmarked Cancun. "Dad?" Andrew left. "Mark won't return my calls. I think I finally understand what you meant about actions meaning more than blood. If you ever want to talk, I'll be here. I tucked it in my desk drawer beside her first-grade picture, back when she still believed Daddy could fix anything. Maybe one day I'd answer. But not today. The end. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more incredible content.